Please hold your questions until after the panel discussion, then we'll come around the microphone. We know our keynote speaker, Luis Rojas. I'd like to introduce fellow panelists, starting with our moderator, Usman Iqbal, MD, MPH, MBA, Chief Medical Officer at Jules Pharma, has 15 years R&D, medical affairs, value and access, expertise in neuroscience, oncology, rare disease, digital health, and AI. Held significant roles at AZ and Sanofi, leader in patient-centric medical programs, experience in transforming medical platforms and strategies, former senior research fellow at Boston University, holds MD, MPH, and MBA from Boston University and Usman Iqbal Medical College. Fellow panelists, Neha Shah, PhD, Senior Director, Medical Affairs and Chief Patient Office Technology at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Senior Biopharma Leader with expertise in research, development, and digital strategy, oversees business engagement and technology platforms at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, focusing on patient and external affairs, previously led AI-driven digital strategy for medical affairs at Moderna, enhancing scientific communications, and at Sanofi as well, spearheaded predictive diagnostics and improved access to diagnostics for rare diseases. Fellow panelists, Nirjhar Chatterjee, MD, consultant at Poseidon Core Pharma Consulting, LLC, former global safety lead, senior medical director at Takeda, expert in pharmaceuticals and biotech, specializing in pharmacovigilance and benefit risk assessments, has extensive experience managing drug safety for rare diseases like hemophilia, metachromatic leukodystrophy across clinical and market settings, expertise in regulatory submissions and safety evaluations for vaccines, hematology, and oncology, collaborates with opinion leaders to deliver a global strategy in planning medical affairs. So I'd like to give it over to our moderator, Usman Iqbal, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the insightful presentation. I have to thank you first for that, because I think what's important is to get a 30,000-foot view of what change management has to be before we can actually get into the details, and I can tell you the devil is always in the details. And that is what this panel discussion is going to be about. The way we do it is we employ design thinking even within this panel discussion. It's going to be a fluid discussion. We start with a broader question, but it's going to lead to more specific pithy aspects of the discussion as we delve down into the fact that then obviously you guys will have a chance to have a Q&A as well. So, our first question is again, it's at the broader 30,000-foot view level, and I'd like to start with you. How can we, it's about aligning a shared purpose across different stakeholders. You mentioned that every time when change management is about, and design thinking, it's not about you put together a solution and then introduce it to the individuals and to the entities and to different functions. You bring them together as part of the change management. Now, since we're talking about technology and its introduction and adoption in change management, what, at least in my experience, what we see is that in many situations, you would like to bring folks together, but when it comes to technologies, have that kind of a niche element, where many times you're introducing a technology aspect to the workforce as well as to the value chain, but you don't have a technological infrastructure. You don't have a technological ecosystem within the company. And you don't have the tech wins. And you're trying to bring people together without doing any of that homework or the precursors to be able to have that kind of effective engagement. So with starting with that kind of a focus in terms of, especially that technology has, what do you think in terms of the stakeholder collaboration with respect to the very onus of technology and how we can actually have a more effective change around that?
I think you summarized it kind of well when you started the conversation around design thinking. And I mentioned it before, when you think about technology, sometimes technologies are enamored with the technology itself and not with the outcome, not with the users, not with the intent behind that technology. So I think we need to help, right? And design thinking does that. So before you even think about implementation, you have, in many organizations that I've worked with, you have design workshops, whether it's a specific workshop in a country or it's a global workshop. I'll give you one example. In the middle of the pandemic, we were implementing a technology system. For the entire organization, we had 40 countries that were deployed in 18 months. We had 60 individuals attending that workshop. First day, first slide, somebody raises a hand, virtual hand. And you know what happens? Everybody kind of pauses like, well, it's too early to be raising the hand. So she gets on, we give her the microphone, and she said, I thought it was a global design. She was based in Belgium. That slide is very US-centric. The team was based in the US. Normally, I would allow the team to answer, respond. I said, let me take it. And I said, first of all, thank you so much for being courageous and reaching the hand. Actually, you have just highlighted why we're here. This workshop is for you to share your perspective. And then in a second, it's on me. Because I reviewed all the slides and I missed it. And you're right. Now that I look at it with that perspective, we missed it. I think it's that workshop from the start that they feel that they have shaped the design of the system, not just being impacted by a change.
So taking that forward, Neha, so let's say we are bringing different stakeholders' perspective together. Again, we're design thinking, but you can feel free to think of other formats, and you have different stakeholders. As was pointed it out, different technology can be looked at from different angles. Different stakeholders can actually perceive that in a different way, because it's all about the outcome. One function, a commercial can look at the technology in a different way. A medical affairs organization is very physician-centric, and they look at it in a different way, and if the technology doesn't have to offer that much for their aspect, they might not be that intriguing about that. And similarly, R&D has a very different objective. So when you're bringing these different stakeholders' perspective together, I mean, again, from your experience as part of the technology center, how would you bring these, how would you bring alignment amongst people with different backgrounds, making sure that, as we talked about in the presentation, that we're maintaining a positive energy within the team, and we are actually making strides in terms of gaining the kind of objective that we really, really want to from that design.
Yeah, I would go back to something Bruce used in his framework, the outcomes, right? So a lot of times people align behind common outcome, but then they need to know what's in it for them, right? And so there are sub-outcomes, especially when you have stakeholders from a variety of different groups and departments. What is it, and if you are developing a system for, we were talking about pharmacovigilance, right? A safety reporting system. There is a stake there for PV team, but then there are commercial call centers and physicians who are also stakeholders. So understanding outcome for that system from each stakeholder perspective, and then designing, using design thinking for each of those users and their journeys and mapping that out, I think gives or empowers those functions and those people to common objectives. So aligning everything to outcome works really well in cross-functional, multi-stakeholder technologies, in my experience.
So, since we talked about pharmacovigilance, I don't want to put you on the spot, but let's see, is there, now since we want to dive into some granular details, from your perspective, we've now chosen a function, which is pharmacovigilance, and we've chosen a technology. And how would you approach a change management thinking around that for a new tool that's coming into the frame? You have to convince the organization that it's good for PV as well as for the rest of the stakeholders? And do you have, can you say an example that you can put forward? Please.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And like Louis said, met all the people aspects, all the pillars. The one which touched me most was engagement. So we are talking about patients. So it's very important to engage the patient. And here I want to tell you something about my experience with hemophilia patients. You should go and attend the American Hemophilia Foundation. It's this foundation is, the patients are so advanced in their knowledge and technology. They're using the latest technologies to understand their disease. So I'll give you an example of something we developed in Shire, which was Takeda, was hemophilia A patients. They have a deficiency of a factor VIII. And so they have a bleeding disorder. So they knock their cells anywhere, they start bleeding internally. So they need to be injected with this factor VIII. And we developed a software tool which was able to dose the factor VIII according to their factor levels, their weight, and which kind of activities they will be doing. So that's one thing, that means we are empowering patients to take charge of their own disease and their own tool, and they are punching in their weight and everything, and they know how much to inject themselves. And so this is a genetic disorder, excellent, so that means they're born with this. So the parents are trained how to inject their children, their boys, mostly boys, because it's X-linked, so for the girl it has to be both X and X. So they are very, very well aware. So education is very, very important. So to bring this tool, we were worried that the patients will not be able to handle it. It's too high-tech, software, and it's also managed by the phone. So it was amazing how the patients were able to take up this tool, and the caregivers and even the healthcare workers and the hematologists could rely on that tool to get the data into their clinical studies, because that's how the patient's data could be incorporated in the clinical studies. Not only that, patients were also becoming part of designing the clinical studies. So the patients in the Hemophilia Foundation, they encourage patients to speak up and look at the protocols, because everything comes on ClinicalTrials.gov, so you can see which endpoints are there. So they encourage people to come and comment on the design of the clinical studies, the inclusion-exclusion criteria, the endpoints, the objectives. So this is patient engagement, and this is amazing in this sector of the disease. And I think this should be propagated to other diseases, especially in oncology, difficult therapeutic areas as well.
So I think one of the most important, what I'm gleaning from that is, which I think we didn't touch upon, but I think it was in the presentation, was starting with the customer experience and starting with the patient. If you bring the patient as the cornerstone of any change management, every stakeholder, whether it's commercial, whether it's R&D, whether it's medical, they will have to listen. They will have to engage, because you're basically bringing the customer as, again, I never want to say patient as a customer, and I think pharma has moved away from that. But at the point of the day, if you bring the patient as the key element of your change management, everyone would listen and everyone would engage. And I believe that's one of a very clear example where there was a rare disease, there was a tool, and they brought the patient that could actually be a cohesive aspect of all the change management strategies. So I think that is one of the key takeaways, and I think the next question comes as an extension of that, which is the patient-centric strategies. Now, how can collaboration drive innovation in patient-centric care during DCTs? Now, we talk about DCTs all the time, we talk about technology, We're talking about AI, and we've spent the last probably a year every month coming together. And I think it's about time we talk about what's in it for the patient. We have a decentralized clinical trial discussion now and then. Every aspect of it has been discussed. And so the collaboration that we had, how can we actually continue on that journey, making sure that it's patient-centric. And by patient-centric, it's a very broader term. So now coming to the questions, we have first aspect of patient-centricity is the clinical trial protocol patient-centric? Do we have that protocol feasibility incorporated with that, as we talked about? The second is the trial execution. Is it patient-centric? Are you facilitating the patients on that aspect? The third aspect is the design of the clinical trials. Are the endpoints patient-centric? Are you actually including patient-reported outcomes? You can end up and going back to patient safety. Yes, you had manageable toxicity and grade 3, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 adverse events, but the patient was pretty much managing their side effects with compromised quality of life. It's the benefit risk aspect of the drug that comes into question. So I think the patient-centricity aspect is very important with respect to collaboration. And Neha, I'd like to start with you in terms of what do you think are the key elements considering any of these three aspects, topics that we talked about, are important from a patient-centricity standpoint, where collaboration can be enhanced using the patient as the key perspective in any course of the drug development.
Yeah, I think you said it yourself, involving patients in all aspects of drug development, but starting with understanding who they are and where they are. And I think the collaborations with patient advocacy groups is a key. I know a lot of companies are moving into that space with stronger patient advocacy collaborations early on, starting from early research, but then keeping those groups engaged throughout the protocol development, for endpoint development, educating patients along the way. There are tools that pharma has available at their disposal that not all patient advocacy groups are resourced to have. So I think we bear that responsibility in terms of bringing patient advocacy groups, the specialists, the centers together to increase awareness, everything around the disease itself and not just around the drug product. And I think technology can help greatly, right? The previous disease registries were paper-based. Now you were saying earlier, what's in it for patients?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we ask patients for input, we provide nothing back,
Mm-hmm.
right? So thinking about technological solutions that can also give patients something back,
Mm-hmm.
to learn about their own disease and what's on the horizon from research perspective, from treatment perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and those collaborations can go a long way.
So Louis, I think that's a very important element. We talked about patients, but patient advocacy can bring a lot of perspective from that element. But I think, let's say, if we are running a trial and we try to focus as much DCT element into it, we would need digital leaders, we would need technologists, we would need a solution design and a training platform, and we would have to convince the R&D workforce, which many times is not really digital savvy. And as you know, that collection of digital data, especially when it comes to endpoints, your endpoint is fraught with challenges. You have data integrity issues, you have operational issues, but at the same time, you have to go towards that journey, because every element of decentralization and every element of technology helps the patients, and at the end of the day is inherently going to help the organization by enhancing their goals as well as their objectives. So when you bring in all of those elements, you need a lot of collaborative spirit within the teams, especially within R&D, where stakes are so high. Moving to a phase 3 trial and introducing technology components that have not previously been tested or tried. But you have to basically enhance the journey and enhance innovation. How would you bring about how do you bring about a change that is balanced enough, but at the same time successful enough to be at that element where companies are comfortable enough to have that at the platform level.
You use the word balance, which I want to anchor to, because it's a balance between going at pace and bringing those that are impacted along, right? Most often, there's already a target. You want to launch, you want to go live. How do you actually say, what's more important? Is it to get it right, people have experience? Because sometimes people don't remember that you hit that date. They remember whether it worked or not. They remember whether the process actually was working. So you need to kind of really bring those, and you use, Neha, the word journey. You have to bring them on the journey. And that takes time. But if you're setting the foundation, you're setting the foundation for those stakeholders, whether you happen to be in technology, in R&D, a patient, and use the word patient-centric, you have to bring them on board day one. For them to be part of the solution, to be shaping the design. If you're not doing that, the changes happen to them. And that's where the resistance comes in. You didn't talk to me, I'm different, I have a different environment, here's my situation at home. But if you actually bring them, they're part of the solution and they're committed. But you have to be prepared to give feedback, to say, no, I like it different. That's the hardest part. When you have different stakeholders and there's a little bit of tension, how do you manage them? But if you anchor to purpose and outcomes, that's much easier to manage.
May I? I just want to add one more point because we can be discussing and speaking a lot, but what it comes down to is what is in the label. So for me, it is once we have achieved the data, we must make sure that it goes to the label. The reason I'm saying that is that the caregivers and the patients read the label. And if the label is, there are lots of lacunae, then there is confusion. And then there are adverse events, and then we are. So I'm just telling you as an example again, in the sector of hemophilia, when I was in Shire, I've changed the label based on one patient data from Australia, one patient. So when we went to the Shire advisory board, they all asked me, Nirjhar, you want to change this label based on one patient? I said, the pediatrician from Australia and I, we discussed it, that if she had known this before, then she wouldn't have used our product in this high dose with that other product. It's just a question of that. And she didn't stop our product, she stopped another product. And that struck me and said that I should put it in the label. So I spoke with some other physicians in Vienna, and we said, okay, let's go for a label change. And at the board, I told them that, see, this is what I'm going to change, and it's going to be beneficial for the patients and for the marketing. They'll be very happy that it is done. And for me, as a safety physician, one patient is already too many for me. So I'm not going to wait for 10 patients, 100 patients. One patient had it, it's giving me the indicator, and I can change the label. So label updates are very, very important for every product.
If I may add, because one of the things that you just said about is the impact on the patient. Takeda has this framework to make decisions, which is called PTRB. Is patient, trust, reputation, business. In that order.
Yes.
So if you have that situation and you start with, wait a second, do I change the label or not? It's impacting the patient, go for it. Oh, right.
I think that's continuing on that value chain, the patient value chain. We have the patient and then we have leadership. And I'm glad you brought the aspect of label because leadership is always tied to outcomes.
Yes.
and your holy grail is the label. If you end up with a good label, that's what is going to get communicated to the physicians. That's what is going to be adopted by the payers. That's going to be your value profile of the drug. And speaking of that, the more you are able to capture intricately the patient experience, the more enhanced label you can get. And I can give you an example. That's where I think leadership can integrate into that. And digital leadership can help us enhance the patient experience by capturing the patient moment. Like in most of the clinical trials that we see, these are snapshot endpoint assessments. 6 weeks after every 6 weeks, patient shows up and we capture those endpoints. Many of the times, let's say in arthritis or in diabetes, or where we have A1C in diabetes, which is a 3-month estimate. But what's happening with the patient on a daily basis? We have now digital endpoints, we have digital tools, we have digital therapeutics, we have digital metrics to actually assess this on a very, very daily basis. And the leaders, the digital leaders, are making a point with the R&D organization. If you're going to capture the patient experience in a more intricate fashion, it would help you enhance your effect size and ultimately the label. But so keeping that example in mind, how can we, and which is the question that we see with it, is we need leadership qualities that are embedded in the ability of the leaders to understand what digital technology actually has to offer to the patients, but actually related to the organization and the stakeholders. That's what's in it for them. So what kind of, and this is an open question, and you can start with that, what kind of leadership qualities I think we need in this day and age to be able to enhance the patient value chain, especially as it relates to digital technology, AI, and all of the other things that we have.
Yeah, I think I would go back to patient centricity, right? So I think all leaders need to have the patient centricity in mind and be thinking from that perspective rather than optimizing, each of the functional and their output from that function. So from digital technology leadership perspective, I think oftentimes digital is thought as the key to a problem, but they come in at the very end. They're not brought in early enough. And I think what digital leaders can do is show the value to the rest of the organization of being part of the problem statement early on. Having that seat at the table to say, well, I understand what the problem is, and these are all the different ways to solve it from technology perspective, rather than having a fully defined problem with solution in mind and then executing on them. So I think there is a mindset shift that's needed to be part of the solutioning, part of the defining of the problem rather than just executing on the solution.
But again, and this is going back to your presentation about, sometimes we have to speak up. And if you're at the table, it's our responsibility to speak up. And many of the times, making a case may not be that easy. And I've been in situations where, making a case and telling an R&D team as to, this is not something that would be in the aspect of what we try to do. We can actually extend the goalpost. We can actually make more improvements. Telling that to the R&D team or to the leaders out there. Sometimes it becomes a very difficult choice, and providing them with viable alternatives, but making a case for them is sometimes it's not very easy. So, what kind of leadership qualities do we think, if you can count about like at least one or two, that you can right away say that if without those, it's not going to be possible. What do you think would be your part of it?
I will build on what Neha said. It's a different mindset. The quote that I had around your ego is not your amigo. If the leader wants to be right and wants to say, this is what I said, you're already losing out. So you have to focus on what is the outcome that you're driving. What is the intention? It's not about being right. It's about doing the right thing. And if you actually engage the leaders across, whether it's R&D, whether it's technology, and you do that with the intent of, here's the outcome, here's the purpose, it is much easier for those conversations. And I will continue to say, it's much harder when you go into conversations, the priorities are not aligned, or you do not know those that you're engaging with. If you know them,
The issue is that there's this perception that using these initiatives, there's a perception that we're sending goals. You are deviating from the overall objective of the plan. And again, I've had those discussions with a number of ones, and you can end up, being scrutinized with that perspective, like, okay, if we introduce this technology, are you going to be accountable and responsible? If it doesn't, it's not successful, and you provide it, the success rate is 20-30%, and every failure leads to enhancement of the learning curve. So, I mean, to your point, how do we actually embrace this aspect of that failure is fine, and at the same time, if we fail, we're going to learn from it, and then we move on. And there are checks and balances that can be introduced during the whole trial process or during the whole R&D strategic process to be able to make sure that everything is balanced in that context.
Nice comment. I think we have Q&A.
I prefer the NASA motto, failure is not an option. So I prefer that because it's true. We, in our pharma industry, with taking care of sick patients, we can't fail. We just can't because there are too many things. So coming back to your question about leadership, for me, it's important to have a purpose-driven leadership. And the purpose-driven leadership for this example, I would say, is transparency. We need to be transparent, not only to the patients, but also to the regulators. It's very, very important in our industry, which has been tainted over the last 50 years before by the media. So we have to regain our reputation as a pharma industry, biotech industry. So that's very important that we are transparent and we are showing the data to the people, and they have the right to the data. So that's one way, I would say, to get the trust, build the trust.
Are we done?
Yeah. I think we're going to open up for a question, and you'll have more opportunity to answer what your comments. So if you could just keep it at 1 minute, Fiona will come around with the microphone. An actual question, please, not a long diatribe, if you could, please. Just an actual question, 1 minute. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for discussion. I want to go back to what Luis presented on only 20-30% success rate for transformation projects. And using that as a basis, when you're designing any digital solutions for clinical studies or anything else, you have a range of patients, those who are very excited about technology, ranging all the way to those who are afraid of technology. So do you design and implement these transformative solutions, digital technologies, based on the average patient, or do you go to the patients who are at the tail end, at the risk of delaying the implementation or toning down the digital solution?
There's a change in how we deploy and how we design systems. It used to be you design the system and you deploy it, and then you deal with the users that are the first adopters who use technology, those that, my gosh, I don't know where to begin. We now iterate. It's no longer kind of like the classic waterfall, it's more agile. So you engage them, early, and you design. And a lot of technology is really powerful that it's configurable. So if you're actually going into countries that have different regulations, it's not a new system. You configure it differently. So it's not either or, it's the art of and. But you have to engage with the patients, with the users, whomever is going to be adopting the technology. from the start. That's the art. And then, of course, you're not going to be able to involve every single patient and every single user, and that's where change management comes in.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
From Colombia. So I was engaged with the Colombian Hemophilia Foundation. Colombia has a fantastic healthcare system for hemophilia patients. It goes to the periphery. There are nursing staff, so the hematologist knows all the patients which may be like 2 days travel distance. And the patients are on the list of all the nurses, and the nurses go and treat them sometimes if they're not able to inject themselves. So, and this is all free, all from the government. So so that's why you need that infrastructure, digital infrastructure, to see how many vials are needed, because these vials have to come back to the hospital so that they can be replenished with new vials. So it's all accounted for. Each vial is accounted for. So for that you need a very good digital base and knowledge and the infrastructure. The nursing staff in Colombia is incredible. It's really incredible.
Those Colombians are incredible.
I'd like to quickly summarize. We have to find a right partner. Your failures are still going to be there, but as you pointed out, always start, do not put it into a phase 3 trial right away, because the stakes are really high. Start small, into small studies, get the learning experience, and as you build the learning curve, you will see, and as I said, if you have country-specific adoption, you don't want to go there with a bigger study. First, if you have experience in a smaller study in that specific country, you'll be able to learn along the way, and as I said, failure ultimately translates into success. You start small, find the right partner, invest in the digital technology. The investment is really good, and then obviously go on more.
Thank you very much, a wonderful talk. Also thank you for sharing 4 persons, 30 years, 120 years of experience from an epidemiology perspective. Just joking. One quick question is that, when you're talking about a patient-centered care or patient-oriented, program, I think it's easy for rare disease, but what about something, for a large child? You can easily range from a couple hundred patients to over thousands. It's very difficult to, if not impossible, to individual, monitoring, closely monitoring care, in your clinical trial, very common, post-marketing is almost like, millions, you're talking about that kind of thing. It's very much a reality, of course, the ecosystem very built upon, the patient-doctor care relationship, but, you can implement any fantastic, very attractive, program, but, you still have a gap, between the patient adherence and patient compliance, and the, good motivation there. But my quick question is that any difference between the rare disease and large trial, or huge populations, and how you take care of using the your concept or platform of patient-centered care.
Yeah, I think we have ways to get there, but I think there are technology vendors out there who are thinking about solutioning for larger sort of disease areas or therapeutic areas where in real world how we can involve patients first from adherence and then second from collection of the data. So we get something from patients, patients get something back, and there are different models being tested for that, including gamification and rewards, and they're not necessarily sponsored by pharma, but they are more patient-centered because they are for patient by patient. I think adoption of those will depend on, more education of patients and also the digital acumen of the patients, right? So they're not created equal, but.
Just to add to that, the more chronic the study, the more chronic the diseases, the more experience we have in the real world. And that goes back to translate into clinical trial, to motivate patients, to enhance patient experience. We're dealing with a very large knowledge base, which we usually many times may not get in a rare disease, but rare disease is inherently patient-centric. But in other disease areas, we have a good knowledge base.
Thank you.
So, because you're all at this meeting, you all value this whole concept of understanding the patient, the outcome, and the importance of the outcome that the result is going to ultimately bring, and the communication of that. And a couple of weeks ago, I think it was somebody involved with Partners or one of these large hospital systems that's taking over the care of huge numbers of people. And they very proudly posted how they were going to patient-centered growth to increase their ability to care. And I read through this multi-page document, and there was not one item that was related to enhancing the outcome of the patient to drive business to the system. So, the question that I have for you is, what percent do you represent in your field? What percent of the companies do you think actually are working at the level of how to create the outcome versus how to create the result for the patient and letting that drive the success? Because from my perspective, that is the only thing that's important. Results should speak for themselves. So, just curious, what percentage do you all think in your areas? You're all on board with very large and very influential companies. So are you the eyesores or are you the representatives of the entire system?
I don't know if I can give you a number in terms of percentages. I would say rare disease companies tend to be very, very patient-focused. And the rare disease companies I've worked with live by that model, that if we take care of the patients, the business will come. And maybe it's easier to do that in that space, and that's why it works. But I have seen that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Neha on that. Being in the pharmacovigilance, 100%. I mean, 1000%. The reason I say that is that I'm a physician for the patient working in the industry. So I'm a patient safety physician. So I am more concerned about the patient rather than the product. So, but I want to know what happened to the product and how did the patient react to that product. That's the science part of it. But for me, I am pulled into all the regulatory meetings and all for the patient's sake, not for the product's sake.
I think it depends on the company. So the first is if it's clear on the purpose, and they have talked about rare disease, right? If it's a company like Takeda, and I talked about PTRD, tends to be relatively easier. But there is always this bottom line that you want to drive. So the second layer is kind of the culture of the organization. How do they make decisions? And is it business driven or is it outcome focused on the patient and the outcomes that we're driving? And the final one is the mechanisms that you have from a governance point of view to kind of monitor that and monitor unintended consequences. But I don't want to present it.
Governance is very important because from a compliance standpoint, a medical affairs organization cannot even look at the number of scripts, how much is the volume of the scripts. They cannot, there's a clear firewall between the sales organization and the medical affairs and the R&D organization. So if a medical science liaison goes and visits a physician office, and if the sales associate is there, they cannot be in the same room at the same time. It's that stringent. You cannot even have a conversation that is tied to the revenue when it comes to having a scientific discussion. Those compliance aspects have evolved over the years, and they become as stringent as you can imagine. So it's now a very, very patient-centric and scientifically oriented value chain, and we should be very comfortable that it's all about the science and the patient. Are we done?
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you very much. We used to build a stage up here, but we thought this is much better and more intimate and interactive here. So we'll have the panel discussion.